Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of complex numbers. Just to recap, what is a complex number? Complex number is something that involves an imaginary number, and an imaginary number has a square root of a negative. So by definition, we use the letter I for imaginary, and we assign it to the value of the square root of negative 1. And then I just put an example right here. So if I did 4i times 6i, that would be 24i squared. And if you squared I, you'd be doing like square root of negative 1 times square root of negative 1, which would just leave you with negative 1. And so you'd get 24 times negative 1, and you get negative 24. Okay, so that's just kind of an example. For more detail, make sure you look at my part 1 video. Now, let's do some examples, finding the zeros, the roots, but they're complex solutions. So if you type this into the graph would not show any intersection, but they are imaginary zeros. So this is what I mean. If x squared plus 4 equals 0, then I can minus 4 to the other side, and I have x squared equals negative 4. And so I can square root both sides, and I can get x equals, remember, you always have plus or minus even when you have imaginary solutions. The square root of 4 is 2, but since it's negative, it's 2i. Alright? So just so we're clear as to what an imaginary root is, I have the graph x squared plus 4. And if it was going down, it would intersect, somewhere over here. And these would be the solutions, So when you have imaginary solutions, there is no intersection there whatsoever. So that's why they're imaginary, okay? So the graph, you'll see the graph never touched the x-axis, and that's why we have the I by all our solutions, okay? Let's do number B, letter B, that's right. I'm going to get everything to one side, so I'm going to add 11 over. So I have 2x squared equals, looks like this is going to be negative 36. And then before you square root, make sure you get rid of that 2. And so I get x squared equals negative 18. So now I need to square root both sides. And so I get x equals plus or minus, and then can I simplify the square root of negative 18? Yes, I can. So let's see here. 18 is 9 times 2. So what's the square root of 9? 3. The square root of 2 wouldn't simplify, so we're going to write the square root of 18 as 3 square root 2. But since it was a negative 18, we're going to say it's 3i square root 2, okay? So I'm going to write x equals plus or minus 3i square root 2 instead of plus or minus square root of negative 18. Or, yeah. Now, if it didn't simplify, it would look like this. X equals plus or minus I times the square root of 18. But since 18 can simplify, use that circled answer. Don't use this. This is an unsimplified version, except you have the I on the outside. But if you're taking the square root of a negative number, always throw an I on the outside of the radical. Even if the radical doesn't simplify, you can still put the I on the outside, okay? So, you try this one, and you try this one. Okay, so pause it and give it a go. Okay, for letter A, I minus 700 to the other side, and then I divide it by 7, so I got x squared equals negative 100. So if you ever get stuck with your square roots, just type in square root of that number as a positive, and then just throw the letter I by it when you write down your answer. But the square root of 100 is 10, so my answer is plus or minus 10i. Sorry if you hear any noise in the background. That's my dogs recording this at home. Yeah, don't have like a recording studio or anything. Anyway, they're drinking water. So, okay. B. I minus 100 to the other side. I divide it by 4, so I get x squared equals negative 20, and square root it. And so if you were to square root negative 20, you could get plus or minus I times square root of 20. But you can simplify the square root of 20. 20 is 4 times 5, and the square root of 4 is 2. So I wrote my final answer as plus or minus 2i times the square root of 5. Okay? Now, let's move on to the next section. This is equality of two complex numbers. So we're finding the values of x and y that satisfy the equation. So it actually looks very complicated. No pun intended, complex, complicated. But it's actually, I think, it's actually simpler than what it looks like. So group your like terms together. The reason why you want to group your like terms together is because I can't solve for x if I'm using a term that's not similar to it. And I can't solve for y for the same reason. So look, you have 2x, and there's no I by it. So that's why I circled 10, because there's no I by that. So look, I'm going to solve for x by doing this. 2x equals 10. Well, that's simple enough. Just divide by 2, you get x equals 5. All right? And then you get negative 7i equals yi. All right? So you could just divide by I. You can do that. And that would cancel that out. And so you get y equals negative 7. See? And that's it. That you're done. You found the values for x and y that would make this equal to one another. Alright? Let's do another example. I got 5x minus 20i equals 35 plus yi. So look, 5x, 35, minus 20i, plus yi. So 5x equals 35. Divide by 5, x equals 7. Alright, no plus or minus, it's just x equals 7. And then in red, I'm going to write negative 20i equals yi. So again, you can just do this by eyeballing, and I'm sure, but this is notes, so I'm going to show my work. Divide I to both sides, and you get y equals negative 20. And that's it. So why don't you give these next two a go, all right? Okay, so on your paper, you won't have to write in that 3, but I have 3x equals 9, and so dividing by 3 gets me x equals 3. And so then I have 3i equals negative yi. So I divided I to both sides, and I got 3 equals negative y. And this is a very common mistake people make. They just leave the answer as y equals 3, but no, it equals negative y. So positive y would equal negative 3. It's just the opposite sign. Just please don't forget to do that. That's all. Now this one, just trying to make it a little bit trickier. It starts off 9 equals negative 2x. Dividing by negative 2, x equals negative 4.5 or negative 9 over 2. It doesn't matter. And then I have a number or a coefficient by each one. So I have 4yi equals 3i. So I'm solving for y, right? I'm looking for this. So I divided it by 4i. I'm trying to get rid of the 4 and the I. So I can do that. I can divide by 4i. So when I did that, I canceled out i's on each side, and that just left me with 3 over 4. So I still got it done in one step, just I had like an extra number there. But that's it, y equals 3/4. So if you got that right, good for you. Now, if you're one of my students, please do the exit quiz. Make sure you're signed into your student Google account, and then you can take this until you reach 100%. And then, you can just show your work below. Other than that, I'm done. Goodbye, everyone.